Primatologist Jane Goodall.
Jane left her home in England to do something that had never been done before, transforming the scientific community forever.
The most important primate behavioralist in the world.
UN Messenger of Peace and founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, Dr. Jane Goodall.
She was somebody that I always looked up to.
A lot of the environmental activism and campaigning I've done in general has just stemmed from all the subsequent work that you've done.
Welcome to the Summit Series with Ari Melber, and we have a very special guest for this Summit interview, the groundbreaking pioneer in primatology. Dr. Jane Goodall went to Tanzania to study chimpanzees by living among them, the first person at the time to ever do that. And she made observations which changed the modern understanding of our closest living relatives. Goodall, also the first ethologist to discover chimpanzees making and using tools, a behavior that scientifically was previously incorrectly believed to be only and distinctly human. She founded the Jane Goodall Institute, a nonprofit which continues this research on chimpanzee behavior. She works on conservation programs in Africa. The Institute recently publishing a new book titled Local Voices, Local Choices, the Takera Approach to Community-Led Conservation, which you can get right now. Goodall continues to travel about 300 days a year on her work, speaking to many different groups, doing conservation science. She serves as a UN Messenger of Peace and has been named one of Time's most influential people in the world. I am honestly, personally, and professionally thrilled to say that Dr. Jane Goodall joins us now on the Summit Series. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be with you here this way. We talk to people sometimes who've reached the summit, as we say, in one sense or another. Your path to do that started by challenging a lot of orthodoxy in science and taking a risk at 26 to go and do this work. How do you think you had the verve, the confidence, the energy to do that at that age?
Well, first of all, it was when I was 10 years old that I determined I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. Secondly, I had a really supportive mother. And when everybody laughed at me that I'd never do that and I was just a girl, she said, if you really want to do it, you'll have to work hard and take advantage of all opportunities, but hopefully you find a way. So, you know, those two things, my determination to study animals in Africa and the support of my mother, enabled me to set off to do just that.
It's striking you describe it that way because 26 was considered young then and is, but you're saying that that was 16 years into an intention. As for your mother, I mentioned the book, you write about her, so we'll jump right into that. You said, I decided I would go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books. This was in 1944, when girls simply did not do things like that. Everyone told me I should dream about something I could do, except my mother, who told me I would have to work very hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if I did not give up, perhaps I would find a way. Tell us about that conditional support. It was not your mother guaranteeing this could work out. It was saying if you did everything hard, perhaps it would work out. How did that affect you? Tell us about her.
Well, I mean, you know, I was born loving animals. I always had support from my mother. And, you know, I think I've always known that nothing in life is predictable because I grew up in World War II. And that taught me a lot about human nature and suffering and, you know, survival. So having a mother who supported my dream enabled me to have the strength and the courage. Well, people say it's courage. I don't know. I don't think it's courage, but, you know, it was something I really, really wanted to do. And I don't know if it's luck or whether luck is something that's, you know, I don't know. But anyway, I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Louis Leakey, and he wanted somebody to go and study chimpanzees. So I wouldn't have aspired to a chimpanzee. I mean, we didn't know anything about them. Nobody had studied them in the wild. There was little known about them in captivity. And when Lewis asked me if I was prepared to go and have a go, of course I said yes.
Let's take a look at a brief clip. This is from that earlier period. This is from 1965.
After about 15 months, I was allowed to approach a small group without attempting to hide. I think it was one of the proudest and most exciting moments of my life.
Simple question for you. You talk and write about building trust. Was that different with them than you might approach it with building trust with people?
Well, it did take rather a long time because they'd never seen a bipedal white ape before, which is what we are. And for 4 months, they ran away from me. And, you know, it was pretty depressing. I always knew, given time, I could get their trust, but I only had money for 6 months. I mean, how do you get money for a young girl straight out from England? I hadn't even been to college. But, you know, Leakey finally got 6 months. And I was really getting desperate when finally one day I saw David Greybeard, the first chimpanzee to begin to lose his fear of me. And he allowed me to come close enough that I could see him using grass stems to fish termites from their underground nests. So David was doing something that was thought to be unique to human. He was using tools.
Is it fair to say that you had a hypothesis, that you were working off a scientific method of sorts because you were approaching them in this way, building time this way, or was it more sort of improvised than that?
It was nothing to do with scientific method. If it had been, I probably wouldn't have had the success with the chimps that I had. It was just that all through my childhood, I sat and waited patiently to watch birds hatching their eggs and feeding their young and things like that. And so I took those same methods of finding out about animals that I used in childhood to the forests of Tanzania. And of course, it worked in exactly the same way.
Right.
And in fact, Louis Leakey picked me just because I hadn't had a scientific training, because he wanted a mind unbiased by the very reductionist thinking of the animal behavior people at that time.
So teach us about that. Do you think that our modern tools and knowledge, which has evolved in some ways, have integrated that kind of progress or not? Because what you're describing and what your life story has inspired for so many is the idea that, of course, there are things we need to know, and there is science, but there's also the limits of orthodoxy and habit. That, as you say, your ingenuity and your fresh mind allowed for things that then contributed to science but had previously perhaps been limited by it. Do you think we have gotten any better at integrating and transcending that, or do those antiquated limits hold us back today still?
Well, for one thing, eventually, because, you know, when I first went to Cambridge, I was told I'd done everything wrong. Chimps should have had numbers, not names. I couldn't talk about personality, mind, or emotion because they were unique to us. But I'd already been taught by my dog as a child that that wasn't true. So I didn't confront the professors. I went on talking about the chimps as they were, with their vivid personalities. And then the Geographic became involved. They sent a filmmaker, Hugo van Lawick, and his film and my careful, observations together started to change the way science thought about animals. And I credit the chimpanzees with gradually changing the scientific reductionist attitude towards other animals.
Given that you continue this work now on conservation, on climate change, on many of our challenges, looking at the next generations, do you think that story and emotion and sentiment, these things that move us, are a larger part of the equation than the data and the science, so to speak? How do you approach that in your own work now?
Well, I think both are important. But, I've discovered during my life that the way to create change is to reach people's hearts. It's no good arguing with somebody who just thinks differently from you, But if you can tell a story that reaches the heart, even if you don't know it at the time, you may have planted the seed of change. So it's a combination of both. We need the science. We need to know the facts of climate change. But how do you get people to understand that it's a real threat, to reach the heart? So it's both.
I love that. You're not a politician, but some of them might learn something from you if they listened. I want to play a bit of another moment when we saw a chimp that was rehabilitated by your institute coming back into the wild. Let's look at that.
In here is Wunda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise.
Really wonderful. What do we learn from that? What do we take from that?
Well, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And as I hadn't met Wunda until that day, as one of the Africans said, how did that chimpanzee know that that was the lady who made this all possible? Well, of course, she didn't know, but it's to do with that sort of strange relationship that I've always been able to have with other animals, not only chimpanzees, that I think has enabled me to do what I've done. And that moment when Wunda embraced me, it was like magic. Quite honestly, it was like magic.
I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that. That's the personal side, because we hear so many factoids about you can have this many friends or you can only bond with this many people, and we live in a world where people have thin connections through technology. You know the drill. You seem to be someone who's forged all kinds of connections within, if you will, our species and theirs. You continue to interact with, I think it's fair to say, far more people than most do. But you don't seem drained by it. You seem, if anything, deepened by it. For someone who's watching this who might feel either inspired by that or even overwhelmed, gosh, how does she do that? Is there anything you can share about that? Do you think that you have a sort of a natural knack and muscle, as which you alluded to from 10 years old? Do you think you've also deepened it over time? Tell us about that.
Well, it's a bit difficult because it takes me into a realm that most people don't want to talk about it. But I have gradually come to feel that I have a mission in life. And one thing led to another, and all I had to do was to make what I think were the right choices. So why did I leave Africa and the Gombe and the chimps that I loved? Because I realized that their habitats were being destroyed and their numbers were decreasing. And while I was trying to find out more about that, I realized that it wasn't only the chimpanzees in Africa facing problems, it was the people suffering from extreme poverty and lack of education and health and expanding populations into wildlife areas. And that's what led to the Tukari program that is the subject of that book that you held up at the beginning of the show. And so literally, one thing's led to another. And how do I get the strength to carry on, which is what people ask me all the time? It's because I have this mission. I mean, I feel I must. I just have to do what I'm supposed to do. And that sounds weird to many people, but I can't help it. That's the way I feel.
When you say it sounds weird, do you mean that people take it as confident or messianic, something like that?
Well, I think people think of, when I say I have a spiritual connection to the natural world, especially when I'm out in the forest, they think, oh, well, she's one of these kooky tree-hugging people. I don't see myself in that role at all, and I don't think anybody who knows me does. But it's the sort of force that keeps me going, that I have a mission, and I've got to take the rest of my life to try and accomplish it.
Yeah.
I may be wrong, but it keeps me going.
Yeah. And in that vein, you've written about the difference between hope and focusing on the tangible things in your own community or environment versus global despair. As you know, we have a generation now that's coming up, and they're being hit with more despair about the whole world all the time. So you've said that while you understand the concept of think global, act local, you actually invert it. You put it differently. Explain that to us.
Well, if you think globally today, I can't think of anybody who really thinks globally, who really understands what we have done to harm the planet, who can feel cheerful about it. But when people come to me and say, well, we're destroying the world, got climate change, loss of biodiversity, intensive farming, destroying the soil, cruelty, all of these things. What can I do? I can't make any difference. And so they lapse into apathy. But I always say to them, what do you care about? Maybe you care about homelessness. Maybe you care about stray dogs. Maybe you care about litter. Maybe you care about Ukrainian refugees. Get back and find something you can do and do it. Roll up your sleeves. Take action. Inspire others to join you. And then realize that all around the world there are people taking action, rolling up their sleeves. Then you will begin to feel hope. And it's hope that leads to action, but it's action that leads to hope. It's a kind of cycle.
I love that. So let's look at specifically the action, because we mentioned the book, and that's part of the work that you're pushing and you want to highlight. You talk about terracing and villagers learning how they can restore fertility to overused soil without traditional fertilizers, introduce other projects, water management, microcredit, forestry. Tell us about that.
Well, that was, as I say, I went around Africa and I learned the problems that were faced by many people. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where, by the way, we're in our 63rd year of studying those chimpanzees. When I began in 1960, Gombe Forest was part of this great belt of forest that stretched across Africa. When I flew over in the late 1980s, it was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. And I realized, A, there were more people living there than the land could support, and B, that they were cutting down the trees because of their need to survive. They were cutting them down to get more land, to grow food for their growing families, or to make money from charcoal or timber. And so it hit me. If we can't help these people find ways of making a living without destroying their environment, we can't save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. And that led to Tukari. And that's what the book is about. And it's a very holistic program. It's been unbelievably successful. It's being replicated in 6 other African countries. And people have come to understand that saving the environment isn't just for wildlife, it's for their future.
Yeah, that seems very globally enlightened. And so many of these political conversations occur in a very zero-sum and often domestic lens. And as you know, and your work has visited this, a lot of countries in the developing world have, and I'm simplifying, but there's a political imperative to say, if rich countries led industrialization and led these problems and now want everyone to sacrifice, that doesn't seem fair. And in many rich countries, there's an attitude of, well, is this for the future or somewhere else? And I don't think you have to be a political expert to know if somebody thinks this isn't fundamentally tied to their community and life, it's generally a lower priority, again, unless they're super interested or an activist. So where do you think this work fits into trying to change, I guess, the next generation's mindset at a global level about why this is doable without selling out or further compromising the access that people need in poorer developing countries, but that also it's in our whole global imperative interest?
Well, I think, it's very simple to realize that the state we're in now, the global environment, is simply due to the crazy idea there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources. And in some cases, they're running out faster than nature can replenish them. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. That's the situation that leads so many people into depression. But there are ways of tackling this. And one of the ways that I feel is tremendously important is working with youth. It's the young people who are being born into and growing up in a disastrous world that we've created. No wonder so many young people are losing hope. No wonder the level of suicide is rising. But there again, it's taking action that makes the difference. And I began the Jane Goodall Institute's Roots and Shoots program back in 1991 in response to all the young people who told me there was nothing they could do about the state of the world which we had created. We have created it.
Well, and your point about profiting off resources with a model that demands next quarter profits be as good or better than this quarter, regardless of what's happening in the world, regardless of everything, almost raises the question of, do you think that multinational-driven capitalism it will be completely at odds with maintaining the earth as we know it?
Well, the way it's practiced by many companies, I would say yes. I don't know if you've read Paul Polman, who used to be head of Unilever for, I think, 15 years. And he's written a book about how courageous companies can take less and gain more, or something like that. But it's an extraordinary book, and it shows that big corporations can have a ethical approach to the way they do business. They can help the people in the country where they source their products. They can make it ethical along the supply chain. They can treat their companies ethically. And as more and more people are becoming aware and trying to make ethical decisions in what they buy, did it hurt the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Is it cheap because of unfair wages? So more and more people are beginning to demand ethically produced products. And that is pushing consumer pressure so that businesses will change.
Is that also why you're a vegan?
Yes. Well, I'm a vegan. I began as a vegetarian about 30 years ago because I learned about factory farms, animals crammed into tiny spaces, not allowed to go out and graze in the grass and so forth. But then I learned the treatment of dairy cows and laying chickens and so on. But the main thing is there are now billions of animals in concentration camp-like conditions. And masses of environment is destroyed to grow the grain to feed them. And it's shocking to realize more grain is grown to feed the animals and for biofuel than to feed the starving people of the world. And so a lot of water is used to change vegetable to animal protein. The animals in their digestion produce methane gas, which is one of the really virulent greenhouse gases, which are leading to climate change, global warming. And also for our own health, all these animals are fed antibiotics routinely, not because they're sick, but to try and keep them alive. And therefore, the bacteria are building up resistance. And that's why you get superbugs in hospitals, because some people now, no antibiotic can cure them.
It's interesting when you break it down like that. It also overlaps with your early works that you were telling us about moments ago, that they said, oh, these are numbers, these can't be individuals. You can't, quote unquote, anthropomorphize animals. On the flip side, you wouldn't want to ignore and be inaccurate about what animals have. And you talk about their communication, their tools, their laughing. What is it, do you think, that keeps us wanting to sort of jealously guard our conception of our human uniqueness or specialness and see it as something that separates us? Go ahead.
Because if you once understand that we humans are not the only intelligent and feeling beings on the planet, if you understand that we are part of and not separate from the animal kingdom, if you understand that every cow and pig and chicken in a factory farm, every animal that is trafficked around the world to be sold in a wildlife market, which, by the way, produced the pandemic, but once you understand that, every one of them is an individual. They feel fear, they feel pain, they feel despair. When you think about that, and that's what we do to them to produce cheap meat, milk, and eggs, then if you really think about that, doesn't that change the way you think?
Yeah. I have another clip for you, because some of this converge on, celebrating animals, and I think you're associated with that to some degree, but of course you're also this scientific lens. And I did want to ask you about what we also see in the sophisticated, but what we might call negative or a dominant strain of how animals can also treat each other, which is something you've also looked at. So let's take a look here at basically what is sometimes called the chimp aggression, or that side of things.
We used to think it was only humans who waged war, but we find that chimpanzees, like humans, have this rather unpleasant ability to create an in-group and an out-group. Yes, I do believe we have innate aggressive tendency. However, that doesn't mean that war is inevitable. That doesn't mean that we have to continue in this mold of aggression. And we do have the ability to control our selfish genes.
To really delve into this, I was thinking about things I wanted to ask you that you've spoken about so many aspects, but when we look at animals, we put it in the lens of survival, and their aggression or their killing is part of their natural activity. In the human society, we take a very different stance, and it's called murder, and it is avoidable. What did your work teach us, do you think, about understanding that aggression, and what is the overlap or application now?
Well, Louis Leakey always believed, and science has now caught up with him, that about 6 million years ago, there was an ape-like, human-like creature, and one branch led through those million years to humans, the other to chimpanzees. And he felt if Jane can find behavior similar, modern chimpanzee and modern human, then maybe we both inherited it from that common ancestor. So let's say we inherited the same aggressive behavior shown by chimpanzees when they attack and even kill each other. But the thing that makes us most different is the extraordinary development of our intellect. And this means that we are capable of controlling our aggressive behavior. And in ordinary society, mostly we do. I mean, you may hear somebody saying, I could kill her, but typically they don't. But the modern war is different. It's not like the territorial conflict between chimpanzees communities. It's usually about power, the desire for power, which again is a little bit like chimps, but it's also very often to do with money. I don't know, but it just seems very different. And most people involved in a human war, it's not their war. It's just what their leaders have forced them into. Isn't that true?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, in political science, you have these theories that healthy democracies, if they're true democracies with true accountability over their leaders, don't typically go to war with each other, for the idea that, as you know, the bulk of the citizenry don't really want to do that. The wars come with autocratic regimes, so Russia starts a war and then you have to respond and so forth. So it's fascinating in that sense. I have a bridge that is of a different nature. It's a little more political. Mostly we're talking very high level, but as you may recall, you really made waves in the 2016 campaign when you made the connection or observation between one of the candidates, then Republican nominee Donald Trump, to chimpanzee aggressive tactics. We have a little bit of tape. Let's take a look.
We just turn it back to the insurance companies, get costs down, and keep quality up.
It's Rubio! It's the greatest hoax ever in the history of our country.
Here's she, huh? And here's Sleepy Joe, what?
I tested positively toward negative. No, I tested perfectly.
I'm a perfect physical specimen, and I'm extremely young.
What do you see there?
I see the same sort of behavior as a male chimpanzee will show when he's competing for dominance with another. They're upright, they swagger, they project themselves as really more large and aggressive than they may actually be in order to intimidate their rivals.
Yeah. And that is something that humans can display in a gradual or healthy way or in an extreme way? Where do you think we come down on that when you look at that here we are with all the technology and knowledge we have, America is a country with a huge footprint, nuclear arsenal, and this is, at least at one point in time, the person who, through the political process, excels?
Well, I'm not an American and I'm not a politician, but looking at it from outside, I see that the divisiveness that's being created in your America is a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that can have a ripple effect around the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we wrap up, I did want to look at how the world around you has evolved on gender. Most of our conversation, we've been talking about your work, the science, the impact, the challenges ahead. And yet another part of your story, of course, is what you stood up against or simply transcended and ran right by. So I did want to get your views about this next generation, about women and girls. And I have a prop, which you're familiar with, but I don't know if everybody knows about it. It's pretty cool. I'm going to hold it up. This is here in our studio. We have the actual, this is real. This is not a tribute. This is a real Dr. Jane Goodall Barbie with the binoculars and everything else. This is something that you, I believe, had thought might be worthwhile in some form before it came to existence. What does it mean to you to have a real-life Barbie? What does it mean to young people who might, and kids who might play with it?
Well, the original Barbies were all pretty pink frills and very, very feminine. And since I've grown up and lived all these 88 years on this planet, I've seen a gradual change in the way that women are accepted into the upper levels of politics and business. And it's not the same in all countries. And there's still some, sexual bias in wages and so forth. But the change has been tremendous. And so a Barbie doll that encourages little girls to think that I can do that if I want to, or I can do something else that I want to. And in this Takari book that you held up earlier, one of the first things we did was to give scholarships so that girls had a chance of secondary education and microcredit opportunities so women could start their own small businesses. Because it's been shown all around the world that as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. And this is a subject people don't want to talk about, but with 7.8 or 9 billion of us on the planet now, and natural resources running out, and a prediction of over 10 billion in 2050, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think those are the big questions. And looking at that in the context of both social progress and conservation makes a lot of sense. I'd love to do, in closing, a lightning round with you. This is where we say something and you try to answer in a word or a sentence. Or you can pass and take a second to think about it. But we've done these. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, okay. I'll try.
You could try. Dr. Goodall, in a word or a sentence, What still gives you hope?
Young people, the resilience of nature and the human brain.
What makes you concerned or pessimistic?
The fact that money still plays such a major role in societies around the world.
Best advice you've gotten?
Follow your dreams.
Best advice you've given?
Follow your dreams.
Best part of really spending time living with animals?
That you understand that you are part of the natural world and that these other amazing beings with whom we share or should share the planet have their own personalities and deserve respect.
Worst part?
Of with animals?
Yeah,
worst
when you
part,
were with them living.
Worst part, the fact that they are so disrespected and so many people treat them as mere things rather than sentient beings, which they are.
Did you have a favorite chimp?
David Graybeard, the first one who lost his fear and showed me tool using. And of course, I have to add, so as not to be sexist, I have to add old Flo, who taught me so much about motherhood and families.
Your role model, if one comes to mind?
I don't know. It's really difficult because there are role models. I don't think I can do that one. There's role models in so many spheres.
Yeah.
And my role model, I suppose, was my mother.
Yeah. Here's one I think you can do from our reading. Best whiskey.
Everybody asks about my best whiskey. Well, not a very expensive peaty single malt, no. Johnny Walker Black Label. If you want a peaty one, if you want a single malt one, then, I don't know. I mean, I'm really not a whiskey expert. I just need it for my voice.
Yeah, I read
and
you.
to have fun.
Fun and keeping your voice are both good reasons. Final three. Failure to you is?
Failure, I would say, thinking about it, is failing to live up to your values.
Success to you is?
Achieving a goal that you have fought for.
And finally, reaching the summit means?
That I haven't got there yet, I hope.
I like that. I've never gotten that one before. Dr. Jane Goodall, you're an inspiration to so many, and I appreciate you still taking time to talk with us and share your work.
Well, thank you. And I've loved talking to you, and I hope we can meet and talk in person.
Well, I'll tell you this. We met briefly I didn't remind you of this because you meet so many people, but you were at NBC, and it was around 2012, and we met in the hallway. And if you don't remember, I said, I'd love to take a picture of you because I was excited to meet you, just like of you. And you said, I'll make time, we could do a picture, but you have to be in it. I don't want to be in a picture alone. Very personable. So that happened briefly, and I loved spending time with you today, and I do hope we can meet in person again.
Yes, I do too, properly, because I didn't know you in the passage, but I think I know you a little bit now.
Okay, likewise. Dr. Goodall, thanks again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.